The vaulted chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with refracted light from its crystalline dome, every beam bending through alien sigils carved high above the seats of power. Delegates from 100 civilizations whispered in their varied tongues, scales, mandibles and metallic voices blending into a low, discordant hum. It was a theater of pride and politics, where one's worth was measured by the weight of fleets, resources and ancient influence. At the center of the dais stood Zirith, frail limbs trembling, a representative of the Varoxi, an insectoid species with fragile carapaces and fragile reputations. His compound eyes flicked anxiously as the ruling arbiter delivered the council's judgment in a voice amplified across the chamber. By the measure of strength, by the tally of contributions, the Varoxi hold no claim to membership in this body. Your petition is denied. A ripple of disdain traveled through the seats. Some laughed softly, others did not bother to conceal their mockery. The Varoxi delegation bowed their heads, antennae drooping in defeat. It was not the first time a weaker people had been dismissed, and it would not be the last. The council thrived on power, compassion had no place in its arithmetic. From the far end of the human section, Ambassador Kale Draven leaned forward, elbows on the polished stone table. He was a man of measured composure, every line of his face controlled, though his steel-gray eyes betrayed a flicker of disapproval. Beside him sat General Marcus Valen, posture rigid in his dark naval uniform. Unlike Kale, Marcus made no effort to mask his disdain. His jaw was tight, his broad shoulders tense, as if he were resisting the urge to call out the hypocrisy in the council's decision. Another verdict by cowards, Marcus muttered under his breath. Kale gave the faintest smile. Careful, General. These walls have ears. They should hear me, Marcus replied, voice low but sharp. If this council exists only to applaud itself, then its purpose is as brittle as the shells of those it abandons. Zirith tried once more to speak, voice quivering. We offer not wealth, not warcraft, but we seek kinship. Without aid, my people will not endure. Are we to be left as prey? The arbiter silenced him with a raised hand. Enough. The decision is final. The Varoxi stumbled back from the podium, shamed and broken, their delicate frames hunched in submission. A chorus of alien laughter punctuated their retreat, cruel and casual. For most of the council, it was a forgettable moment, just another weak species pushed aside. For Kale, it was a fracture in the grand narrative he had studied his entire career. Humanity was still new here, their place tenuous, but he had seen enough of history to recognize a pattern repeating itself. He leaned closer to Marcus. Tell me what you see. A flock of vultures, Marcus said, not bothering to hide the edge in his tone. They circle the weak and call it order. Kale's gaze lingered on Zirith, who now sat isolated, antennae twitching in distress. I see an opportunity. Perhaps more than that. Marcus turned, frowning. You're not seriously considering entanglement. Our position here is precarious enough without sponsoring causes that have no return. Return, Kale repeated quietly, testing the word as if it were distasteful. Perhaps that is the problem, Marcus. Every species here calculates worth in profit or strength. But what if we invested in something different? Before Marcus could answer, the council session drew to a close, the arbiter's gavel echoing across the chamber like a final judgment on mercy itself. Delegates rose, conversations flared, and the chamber dissolved into chaos. Kale and Marcus remained seated, watching as Zirith and his companions shuffled toward the exit, unnoticed by anyone but the humans. Marcus shook his head. You've got that look again. The one that usually ends with me cleaning up the mess. Kale chuckled softly, though his expression remained sober. The galaxy sees the Varoxi as expendable. But if humanity wishes to prove itself, perhaps we should show them what others will not. By adopting a species of beggars? Marcus asked. By proving that strength is not the only currency worth trading, Kale replied. And by showing that humanity's measure is not weighed on the same scale as theirs. The general sat in silence for a moment, eyes narrowing as he studied the crowd dispersing around them. He had fought in battles where allies abandoned one another when the cost grew too high. He had buried men because stronger nations deemed their sacrifice inconsequential. His pragmatism warred with the memory of betrayal, and in the quiet, the tension in his shoulders eased just slightly. Diplomats and their riddles, he muttered. Say it plainly, Kale. You want us to help them. Kale inclined his head. I do. Marcus let out a long breath, the kind soldiers give before walking into a storm. Then you'd better have more than words. Because if we take this step, the galaxy will laugh in our faces. And worse, they'll come to test us. Cale's eyes sharpened, the weight of his conviction burning through the mask of diplomacy. Then let them come. Humanity has been tested before. We know how to endure. The two men rose from their seats, their figures cutting distinct silhouettes against the luminous crystal walls. Around them, the council's chatter swelled, a chorus of mockery and prideful indifference. Yet for the first time in that chamber, a different note resonated, quiet, defiant, human. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus leaned close, voice a low growl. "I hope you know what you're dragging us into." Cale's reply was calm, almost serene. "Everyone else turns them away. But I think this is where we step in." The statement hung between them, heavy with implication. Beyond the chamber doors, the path ahead promised only difficulty, perhaps danger. Yet in the face of rejection and ridicule, humanity had made its first choice. Not to stand apart, not to follow the council's indifference, but to extend its hand where no other would. And though the council did not yet realize it, a fracture had formed in their carefully ordered hierarchy, one that would widen until the entire galaxy would feel its tremor. The reception hall adjacent to the council chamber was a place where power gathered in hushed corners and deals were struck behind crystalline partitions. The air carried the hum of translators, the rustle of silken robes, and the faint metallic tang of recycled atmosphere. Cale Draven moved through it with an unhurried grace, his diplomat's smile fixed in place though his thoughts churned. Every glance from alien dignitaries carried mockery, amusement that humans, the newest children of the stars, still presumed to stand shoulder to shoulder with ancient empires. Yet Cale ignored them, his focus drawn to a small, hunched figure seated near the far wall. Zirith, the Varoxi representative, sat apart as if isolation had become instinct. Cale approached without preamble, his voice even. "Ambassador Zirith." The insectoid looked up, startled. His mandibles clicked faintly before forming words. "You honor me, though I fear I am no longer an ambassador of anything." Cale gestured for him to remain seated and took the chair opposite. "Titles matter less than truth. Tell me, what would your people face now without aid?" Zirith's antennae drooped, and his voice grew fragile. "The raids will continue. The Draxians strike our convoys. The Keln marauders take our young. We lack soldiers, we lack ships, we lack everything but the will to endure. But will is not enough when teeth close around your throat." The words carried no exaggeration. Cale had heard similar stories whispered in corridors of diplomacy, but hearing it from Zirith lent them a weight impossible to dismiss. He folded his hands together, his tone deliberate. "If the council denies you, then perhaps another can choose differently." Across the room, General Marcus Valen leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, expression storm-dark. He waited only so long before striding forward, boots ringing against the polished floor. His presence was a blade beside Cale's measured tone. "Ambassador," Marcus said to Zirith, "do not mistake pity for strength. If you want survival, you need warriors, not words." Zirith flinched at the sharpness, but Cale lifted a hand. "Marcus speaks plainly. He always does. But consider this, humanity has known invasion, ruin, and the fear of extinction. We endured. Perhaps our experience could serve you." Marcus frowned. "Cale, we didn't come here to play guardians to every broken race the council tramples." "No," Cale replied calmly, "we came to find our place in this galaxy. And perhaps this is how we define it, not by what we gain but by what we give." The Varoxi's mandibles clicked softly, uncertain. "Why would you risk yourselves for us? We have nothing to offer. No fleets, no wealth, no advantage. The others mock you even now." Marcus shot a glance around the hall. Indeed, several alien delegates watched with amused disdain, whispering to one another. One reptilian envoy sneered openly, his scaled mouth curling in contempt. "Humans," he said loudly enough to carry, "always eager to waste themselves on lost causes. Perhaps they think charity earns respect." Marcus turned toward him, eyes hard as steel. "Respect is not given, it is taken. Remember that." The envoy scoffed, slithering away with a hiss of laughter. Zirith, meanwhile, shrank further into his seat, shame etched in every movement. Cale leaned closer, speaking gently. "Do not mistake their mockery for truth. Power without compassion is brittle. It cannot last." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Zirith whispered, almost pleading, "If you offer your hand, I will take it. Not for myself, but for those who still believe we are worth saving." Cale nodded once, decisive. "Then we will stand with you." Marcus exhaled sharply, as though conceding to inevitability. "If we're doing this, we do it knowing what comes next. The moment we shelter them, we paint a target on our backs. Kale's voice carried resolve. Then let the galaxy see humanity's answer. The decision made, Kale rose to his full height and offered his hand. Xerath hesitated, then reached out a trembling limb, chitin clicking softly as it clasped the ambassador's palm. For the first time that day, the Varoxi did not look like prey. He looked like someone who had been given a chance. The hall quieted. Whispers flared as others realized what had just transpired. Humanity, untested and often dismissed, had done what no other power dared: extend alliance to the Forsaken. Some sneered louder, others watched with curiosity, but none could ignore it. Marcus leaned toward Kale as they guided Xerath away from the hall's center. "Do you feel that?" Kale glanced at him. "Feel what?" "The weight," Marcus said. "Every eye here is waiting for us to falter. They'll test us the first chance they get." "Then let them," Kale replied, voice cool as tempered iron. "We've always been underestimated. It's time to make that their mistake." As they stepped out into the corridors beyond the council chamber, the hum of gossip followed like a shadow. Behind them, the council resumed its self-congratulatory debates, blind to the tremor that had just shaken its foundation. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, perhaps even open conflict. But in the quiet between Kale and Marcus, a pact had formed as sharp and binding as any treaty. Humanity had chosen not to stand apart but to stand for someone who had no one else. And for the first time in generations, a species dismissed as weak found reason to hope. The convoy drifted through the velvet dark of space, a fragile thread of freighters carrying Varoxi refugees and the last remnants of their supplies. Their hulls bore scars from years of harassment: pitted metal, scorched plating, hastily patched breaches. They moved slowly, too slowly for the predators that haunted the void. Flanking them, sleek and angular, glided the ships of the Terran Navy: 3 destroyers, 2 frigates, and a carrier that bore the banner of a species still earning its reputation among the stars. On the bridge of the HSS Resolute, General Marcus Valen stood at the command dais, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. Every green blip representing a refugee vessel felt like a responsibility etched into his chest. "Convoy reports steady progress, sir," his operations officer announced. "We'll reach Varoxi safe space within 12 hours. Marcus gave a curt nod but did not relax. He had fought too many battles to believe in unchallenged passages. Where weakness traveled, predators followed. His instincts were confirmed when a harsh alarm cut through the bridge, the tactical display blooming with red signatures. "Multiple contacts emerging from FTL, bearing 217, the officer reported, voice tightening. Marcus leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The silhouettes were unmistakable: jagged, predatory hulls bristling with weapons. Draxian marauders. He had expected them, but not in such numbers. At least a dozen ships, larger and better armed than the refugee freighters could ever hope to withstand. "Sound battle stations," Marcus commanded, his voice steel. "All ships formed defensive line around the convoy. Bring weapons online." The klaxons blared, and the Resolute came alive with purposeful motion. Across the fleet, Terran crews strapped into stations, fighters prepped for launch, and shields thrummed with rising power. On one of the refugee vessels, Xerath watched the distant lights shift with dread. His kind were not built for war. The sight of marauder ships sent tremors down his limbs, yet for the first time he was not entirely hopeless. The humans had promised protection. Now he would see what that promise meant. Kale Draven, stationed aboard the Resolute as diplomatic envoy, entered the bridge, his face a mask of calm despite the mounting tension. He moved to Marcus's side. "So, this is the test." Marcus didn't look away from the display. "Not a test. An ambush. They want to bleed us in front of our new friends." "And your answer?" Kale asked. Marcus's mouth curved into something between a snarl and a smile. "The same answer humanity always gives when cornered. We fight back." The Draxian commander's voice crackled over the comms, translated into a guttural growl. "Terran vessels, surrender the Varoxi convoy and retreat. Interfere and you will be reduced to wreckage." Marcus activated the channel, his voice cold as void. "You'll find Terrans don't surrender. And we don't retreat." He cut the line before a reply could come. The first salvo of plasma fire streaked across the void, slamming into the outer shields of the convoy. The Resolute answered with a broadside of railgun slugs, bright tracers carving through the darkness and tearing into a Draxian frigate. Explosions blossomed silently, debris scattering like shrapnel stars. The battle erupted in full. Human ships moved with daring precision, weaving between larger enemy cruisers, exploiting weaknesses with bold maneuvers. Fighters launched from the carrier in coordinated waves, darting through enemy lines like hornets. Where other species fought cautiously, Terrans embraced risk, trusting in instinct and resilience. Marcus stood firm at the heart of the storm, issuing orders that turned chaos into strategy. Bring the Resolute around their flank. Target engines, not hulls. Pin them down. Keep the convoy covered at all costs. Cale watched him, noting the fire in his eyes, the weight of responsibility he carried without hesitation. This was why humanity survived its own centuries of war. Not because of superior numbers or technology, but because men like Marcus refused to yield. Yet the cost was immediate. A Terran frigate took a direct hit, shields collapsing in a flare of sparks. The ship spiraled, venting atmosphere, before its captain rammed it into an enemy cruiser in a desperate act of defiance. Both vessels vanished in a blossom of fire. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he gave no outward sign of grief. Loss was the price of defiance, and he had long accepted the currency. On the refugee ship, Zirith and his people watched in stunned silence as Terran vessels bled and burned for them. It was inconceivable. No one had ever fought for the Varoxi. They had always been abandoned, prey left to the wolves. Now strangers bore the burden of their survival, and it carved something raw and powerful into their hearts. The Draxians pressed harder, sensing victory. 3 Marauder cruisers broke through, bearing down on the convoy. Marcus saw it instantly. All guns to intercept. If we don't stop them, the Varoxi are finished. The Resolute surged forward, shields flaring under heavy fire. Marcus gripped the console, voice ringing with command. Helm, give me ramming vectors on that lead cruiser. His officer turned, eyes wide. Sir, if we ram. Do it. Marcus barked. The destroyer accelerated, angling dangerously close to the massive Draxian vessel. At the last moment, railguns fired point-blank, shredding the enemy's engines. The Resolute veered off with hull plating ablaze, scraping past debris by mere meters. The cruiser spun out, drifting helpless. The convoy was spared for now. Cale exhaled, tension visible in the lines of his face. That was madness. That was necessary, Marcus replied grimly. The battle raged on, hours stretching into a blur of maneuvers and counterstrikes. Human ships fought like cornered wolves, losing blood and steel but never breaking formation around the refugees. Finally, battered and outmaneuvered, the Draxians disengaged, retreating into the dark with half their number destroyed. The void grew quiet again, littered with the wreckage of the fallen. Silence fell across the Resolute's bridge. The crew was exhausted, bruised, some bleeding but alive. The convoy remained intact. Against overwhelming odds, humanity had kept its promise. Zirith's voice came over the comms, halting and full of awe. You bled for us. You lost for us. Yet you owed us nothing. Why? Marcus stared at the wreckage drifting beyond the viewport, his expression carved from stone. Because no one else would. Cale placed a hand on the console, his gaze meeting Marcus's. The choice they had made in the council chamber was no longer theoretical. It had been written here in sacrifice and fire. Humanity had drawn its line, and the galaxy would soon feel the consequence. But even as the wounded were tended and the dead counted, Marcus's eyes remained fixed on the stars ahead. He knew this battle had not ended the threat, it had only begun the war. The Varoxi homeworld glimmered like a fragile jewel beneath its pale sun, a world of delicate spires and fertile plains now shadowed by the promise of annihilation. In orbit, humanity's battered fleet lingered in a patchwork formation, scarred from their last stand but unbroken. Repairs hummed through every corridor, hulls were welded with fresh scars still glowing, and soldiers moved with the weary rhythm of men who knew there was no rest before the storm. General Marcus Valen stood in the command center of the HSS Resolute, his uniform frayed at the edges, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but alight with a fire that had not dimmed. Before him hovered the tactical display, its projection marking dozens of crimson signatures emerging at the system's edge. The Draxians had come in force to finish what their marauders had begun. Ambassador Cale Draven stepped onto the bridge, his diplomatic attire far from pristine, sleeves rolled and collar undone. Though unarmed, his presence carried weight. He had been there when promises were made, and he intended to see them honored. They'll bring everything they have this time, he said quietly, studying the crimson tide advancing toward the planet. Marcus's jaw tightened. Good. Then there'll be no doubt when we break them. The doors slid open again and Zirith entered, his posture no longer hunched. His carapace still bore cracks of old wounds, but his antennae rose with a new steadiness. He had spent the days since the convoy's salvation among his people, speaking words he never thought he would say, "We are not alone." Now he stood on the bridge, a symbol of the alliance forged in fire. "My people wish to fight," Zirith said, his voice firmer than before. "We have no soldiers, no fleets, but we have hands and we can learn. Give us ships, teach us to hold the line beside you." Marcus studied him. The old Marcus would have dismissed the request. Training the unprepared on the eve of battle was folly. But he had seen what the Varoxi carried. Not skill, not power, but the raw will to endure. He gave a curt nod. "We'll put your people in auxiliary craft. Kale, get them into the simulators. They'll have hours, not months, but it will be enough to bleed." Kale's brow rose. "You're entrusting them with your line?" "I'm trusting them," Marcus said, "because they're fighting for their home. Sometimes that's enough." The hours that followed were a crucible. Human officers drilled Varoxi volunteers with brutal efficiency. Hands fumbled over controls, antennae quivered with nerves, but determination burned through every mistake. Kale walked among them, offering steady words, reframing failure as progress. Marcus stalked the training bays like a predator, barking corrections, his tone hard but his intent unyielding. When a young Varoxi collapsed under the pressure, Marcus knelt, his voice quieter than the soldiers had ever heard. "Stand again. You fall once, you rise twice. That is how you survive." And the young pilot rose. When the Draxian fleet entered orbit, the defenders were ready. The battle began with the fury of colliding storms. Draxian cruisers unleashed plasma fire that seared across the void, their formations precise and merciless. Humanity's ships answered with railgun salvos and swarms of fighters that danced through the enemy lines with reckless daring. At the fringes, Varoxi pilots in repurposed shuttles flew beside Terran escorts, clumsy yet fierce, their fear burned away by the knowledge that this was their only chance. On the Resolute, Marcus barked orders with surgical precision. "Frigates, pivot to Sector 9, intercept that cruiser. Carrier, launch second wave. Keep their flank pressured." He moved like a man born to command in chaos, each decision cutting seconds from disaster, each risk held on the edge of catastrophe. Kale stood at his side, offering clarity where steel alone could not. When intercepted Draxian comms revealed threats of planetary bombardment, it was Kale who cut in, his voice carrying calm defiance across open channels. "You seek to erase the Varoxi? Then hear this: humanity stands before them. Strike them and you strike us." His words carried not just to enemies but to allies, fueling the Varoxi pilots who fought with renewed resolve. The tide shifted back and forth in brutal rhythm. A Terran destroyer split apart under concentrated fire, scattering burning debris into orbit. A Varoxi shuttle rammed itself into a Draxian bomber, 2 lives extinguished in an instant but saving thousands below. Every sacrifice deepened the resolve of those still alive. Finally, the Draxians committed their flagship, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons and radiating arrogance. Its cannons began charging for a planetary strike that would scour the Varoxi capital from existence. The tactical display screamed warnings as energy spiked. Marcus's eyes locked on the projection. "That ship dies or the Varoxi die. There's no third path." He turned to Kale. "If we ram the Resolute, we can breach its hull and detonate from inside." Kale's face hardened. "And lose yourself, your crew, everything?" "Marcus, if you fall here, humanity loses more than ships. It loses its spine." For a heartbeat, the general said nothing. Then Zirith stepped forward, antennae trembling but voice unwavering. "You have already given blood for us. Let us give ours. Teach me how to strike and I will take the blow meant for my world." Marcus's gaze lingered on him, then softened just enough to show recognition of courage. He shook his head. "No. If anyone makes that call, it's me." Kale cut in sharp. "You're both wrong. Humanity doesn't survive by throwing itself into fire. It survives by bending the fire back at its source. There must be another way." Marcus's mind turned, calculation flickering across his eyes. He slammed his fist on the console. "All ships converge on the flagship. Target its ventral batteries. Varoxi craft, follow our lead." The fleet surged forward in a desperate charge. Railguns hammered, torpedoes lanced, Varoxi pilots swarmed like wasps around the flagship's shields. The Draxian cannons neared full charge, light building in their cores. Then, in a daring maneuver, Marcus drove the Resolute beneath the enemy's belly, sliding into the blind spot of their firing arc. "Now," he roared. The combined fire of the Terran fleet and Varoxi pilots smashed into the exposed section. Shielding collapsed, armor buckled, and a chain of explosions tore through the flagship's length. Its charging cannons overloaded, and with a final burst of light, the monstrous vessel split apart, scattering fragments into the void. Cheers erupted across comm channels, human and Varoxi voices mingling in disbelief and triumph. The Draxian fleet, leaderless and broken, scattered into retreat. For the first time, the Varoxi homeworld was safe. On the bridge, silence followed the chaos. Marcus stood tall, though his body sagged with exhaustion. Kale exhaled slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting in the faintest smile. Ziritha's eyes shimmered, his voice reverent. "We are alive because you refuse to abandon us. No word of ours is enough to repay it." Marcus looked at him, his tone steady but carrying the weight of conviction. "Then repay it by standing. By never letting anyone tell you that you're worthless again." When the council reconvened weeks later, the chamber was different. The Varoxi stood with humanity, no longer supplicants but allies. The council's laughter had faded, replaced with wary silence. Kale's voice carried across the assembly, firm and unyielding. "If your measure of worth is power, you will never understand. Humanity does not measure. Humanity stands." The silence that followed was not dismissive. It was the silence of an empire realizing a new force had declared itself, not as conqueror, not as beggar, but as protector. And in that silence, the galaxy shifted. Outside the chamber, Marcus and Kale walked side by side, their steps heavy but resolute. Marcus glanced at his companion. "We've just painted a bigger target on our backs than I ever imagined." Kale smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But tell me, Marcus, when has humanity ever been afraid of a fight?" For the first time in a long while, the general allowed himself a quiet laugh. The path ahead was perilous, but for humanity and their newfound allies, it was theirs to walk. And the galaxy would learn that when all others turned away, humanity stepped in. If this HFY story thrilled you, smash that like button and subscribe.